My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, a few days ago I got a call from somebody outside of our community. It doesn't relate directly to us. And it is an issue of a personal divorce that took place between him and his wife. And he called me up saying, I said this and I regret saying this and I don't know what to do now. And subhanAllah, brothers and sisters, one of the most taboo topics that we don't like to talk about is the topic of divorce. But the fact of the matter is that this is a part of our lives. It is a part of community. It is a part of our sharia. And the fact of ignoring it does not change the reality of its existence. And I will tell you, brothers and sisters, as a person who is active in Islamic fields in this country, traveling around the country, and having read studies and surveys, the sad reality is that our divorce rates, meaning the American Muslim community, is coming closer and closer to the mainstream divorce rates that are prevalent around us. Alhamdulillah, it's not that bad yet, but still, divorce rates used to be in the 1 digits. Now they are 20-30% in the second generation. In other words, in just a little bit of time, they will be equivalent to the divorce rates that we have prevalent amongst this country. And the problem is, brothers and sisters, the problem is most of these couples, they didn't follow the Islamic procedure. They did not avail themselves to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they hastened into a exit, into a final solution that they should not have hastened into. How many marriages have been destroyed? How many children have been deprived from regular normal parents and lives? How much damage has been done simply because men and women, husbands and wives, were hasty, were arrogant, were angry, were ignorant of the Sharia. Brothers and sisters, marriage is one of the greatest blessings Allah has given us as human beings. I have given a number of khutbahs on the positive side. I've given many talks about the love that should exist between a husband and a wife. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran that وَاللَّهُ جَعَلَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ بَنِينَ وَحَفَدًا وَرَزَقَكُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. Allah has made from amongst you your spouses, and from the two of you He has given children and grandchildren. So which of the blessings of Allah will you deny? Allah has given you so much good from your spouses, from your children, from your grandchildren. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that of His signs is the love and mercy that exists between a husband and wife. We know our mother and father Adam and Hawa, that before even Allah Azza wa Jal told Adam to enter Jannah, Allah created Hawa for him even before he was in Jannah. وَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمْ أُسْكُنْ أَنْتَ وَزَوْجُكَ الْجَنَّةِ. And when they came down to this earth, Allah said, قَالَ اهْبِطَا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. The both of you go down. Subhanallah, brothers and sisters, even in this, we find a very important lesson. Couples need to stick through in the good and in the bad. In Jannah, and when they're punished to be flung onto this earth. Couples need to stick through. Not only in the good, because this is the big problem. When it's lovey-dovey, when it's romantic, when it's good, everybody wants to have a marriage like this. But how about when the going gets tough? How about when arguments develop? And this is the biggest problem, that Muslim couples, they hasten to the exit door, not realizing that exit door, it is like a fire escape. It's a fire escape. It should never be used unless there is an emergency, a threatening situation. You should not even think of the fire escape. It's there, you know it, but it's not something you think about. It's not something you want to use. Rather, it is only used in cases of dire necessity as a last resort. Unfortunately, brothers and sisters, we start thinking of the fire escape like the main entrance to our houses. And we start thinking, okay, khalas, if the going gets tough, like I exit my house through the regular door, I shall exit this marriage through the fire escape. And this is not the way that our Sharia has set up the normal institution of marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls marriage in the Quran مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا وَأَخَذْنَ مِنْهُنَّ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. You have taken from them a sacred covenant, a hard trust. مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظ. غَلِيظ means strict. Ghalid means sacred, and mithaq means covenant. So Allah calls marriage a sacred, a strict covenant, meaning a promise. And these strict promises, you don't just break them for the flimsiest of things. You don't break them because you had one argument. You don't break them because your temper was lost once, because she said something or he did this. Subhanallah, mithaqan ghalidha is a sacred covenant. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this phrase in the context of divorce. In the context of divorce, Allah uses this phrase to describe marriage, وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. And therefore this is demonstrating that this sacred covenant should not be broken unless and until there is no other alternatives. And in a very famous tradition that all of you are aware of, with a slight weakness in its chain, but our scholars have said the content is authentic, that the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, أَبْغَضُ الْحَلَالِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الطَّلَاقِ. The most despised of all things that are permitted in the eyes of Allah is divorce. The most despised. Allah Azza wa Jal hates divorce, despises divorce. It is halal. Yes, but there are some things that are halal that are not resorted to unless you have to resort to them. It's not haram. If a couple has to divorce, okay, they have to divorce. But the Prophet ﷺ told us, أَبْغَضُ الْحَلَالِ بَغْض, بُغْض. There's a hatred, despicable. It's not something that should be resorted to. And we learn in the hadith that Iblis is so happy when a divorce takes place, that he comes out of his chair and he hugs the shaitan that caused a couple to divorce. That Iblis is so happy when divorce takes place because he realizes that breaking a marriage is breaking a family. Breaking a family is causing children despair. It is causing problems in society. And therefore, brothers and sisters, before even somebody thinks about divorce, before even somebody contemplates using this fire exit in the house, the first thing they need to do is to figure out what are the steps that I need to do before that stage is reached. What are the Sharia alternatives before the final stage, and what can be done to prevent that and to save a marriage. Common sense dictates, brothers and sisters, common sense, that when there's an issue, it needs to be brought up directly with one's spouse. It needs to be brought up directly in communication. Before anybody else is brought in, before family and friends are reached out, the couple needs to discuss their issues together. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that when you fear something, when something happens, then فَعِظُوهُنَّ. And فَعِظُوهُنَّ means to admonish. And the admonishing means you're explicit. You explain, I don't like this. This should not have happened. You should not have done this. You should not have treated me this way. Why did you say this? It is hurtful to my feelings. Whatever the issue might be, it must be expressed to the other spouse. Husbands, I advise you now that remember that Allah Azza wa Jal has given you, generally speaking, the higher rank in marriage. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has says that وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. Men have one daraja above. And Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed you with more physical and emotional strength. And therefore, the damage you can cause is much more. And the physical and the emotional damage, because damage isn't just physical, it's also emotional. It's also the tongue. Women are more fragile than men. As our Prophet called them the delicate, fragile vessels, he called them in a hadith. They're very delicate, and a man's hurtful comments can be more painful to a woman than even physical sometimes. And therefore, brothers, be careful what you say and how you say it. Be careful in your expressions, and always remember that our Prophet ﷺ told us, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra." I command you to treat women well. And he said the best of those men are the best of those who treat their wives in the best of manners. And I am the man who treats my wife in the best of all manners. And never once did our Prophet ﷺ rebuke any of his wives. Never once was he vulgar at them. Never once did he lift a finger to lay it on their bodies. This is the role model that we have in our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And men, always remember, if Allah has blessed you with some privilege and some responsibility, then with that privilege as well, there should be leniency. There should be turning around. There should be ignoring. And that is afu. That is just to forgive and overlook. Our Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith that is misused and abused, that he said that a woman has been created from a rib. And the meaning of this hadith I explained, clarified in a previous khutbah, that from a man's perspective, a woman is not acting the way he thinks it is rational for a person to act. Sometimes a woman acts in a manner the man doesn't understand, and the man loses his temper, loses his patience. Why don't you act straight with me? The way he would expect another man to act with him. But a woman is not a man. And so what is our Prophet ﷺ saying? The woman has been created in a different way than the man. So you need to just ignore, overlook, forgive. It is the man that needs to be the more forgiving and the more overlooking, because the man is the one that has the responsibility, and the ultimate privilege of divorce really is in the hands of the man. So when he has this privilege, with this privilege should also come responsibility, should also come the more wiser of the two, the more mature of the two. Okay, not everything will be perfect, let it go for the greater good, and choose your battles wisely. Not every issue needs to be rebuked, not every issue becomes a big issue. You are not perfect, so she will also not be perfect. So choose that which you want to have a discussion over in the wisest of manners. And now I speak to the wives here, that wives, just like I have said that men think differently than women and women think differently than men, you also need to understand that from your perspective, men are not acting the way you might think a woman friend would act. And one of the most important things is that every self-help book, every marriage book says something that might sound demeaning, but it is so true. It advises wives that, oh wives, sometimes you have to treat your husband like a child. Now what does this mean? It means you need to explain to your husband like you would to a child. Why? Because I'll be very frank with you, women, you have it in your systems or in your methodologies that your husband will understand why you're irritated, or why you're giving him the cold shoulder, or why you're giving him the cold treatment. And to you it's obvious something so big happened, and yet your husband did not solve the problem, did not cater to the problem, so you become irritated. Let me explain to you, my dear sisters in Islam, that what is obvious to you might not be obvious to the men. What is so clear to you might not be clear to the men. And that is why before you jump to the silent treatment, before you jump to some type of withdrawal, or you're not being nice to your husband, be frank. Bring up the subject. Explain why is it that you are hurt. And believe me, many times you will be pleasantly surprised to realize your husband was clueless as to why you're irritated, and he will apologize and say, I didn't even realize I said something in front of your friends and you took it in this manner. Whatever the case might be. Many times the husband will realize, but he didn't understand the problem. So what did you gain by becoming angry, by becoming pent up in your frustration without first communicating with your spouse? And so the first things both parties need to do is to communicate. And also, as I advised husbands to overlook the faults of their wives, wives as well, I advise you, overlook the faults of your husbands. You are not perfect, he is not perfect. You are not perfect, she is not perfect. The both of you are imperfect. You will not find a perfect spouse. They don't exist. And so every one of you will have mistakes. Therefore, you must tolerate some mistakes in your partner. Wives, your husbands as well might have some issues. They might have some sharp tongue. They might have some flare, some anger flare, whatever it might be. Weigh the pros and the cons out. And understand that as our Prophet ﷺ said, any woman who prays her 5 prayers and fasts the month of Ramadan and protects her chastity and obeys her husband, she will enter Jannah through any door she desires. And in another hadith, our Prophet ﷺ said, any woman who dies and her husband is pleased with her, she will be from the people of Jannah. In other words, my dear sisters in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it a religious blessing, a religious duty upon you, through which you can earn Jannah if you sacrifice your own ego. You know, you might be right. Wallahi, you might be right. But by humbling yourself, not for the sake of your husband, for the sake of your Creator, by humbling yourself and swallowing your pride, and then forgetting about the issue or forgiving or moving on, perhaps you might lose this one battle, but guess what? You will save the marriage. And saving the marriage is winning your battle. Saving the marriage is winning your battle. And realize, if you give up something for the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you more than what you gave up. Brothers and sisters in Islam, a divorce is never done in haste. A divorce is never done in anger. If a person genuinely wants to take the fire exit, then it had better be to save himself from a bigger problem, a bigger issue. Otherwise, divorce is always the last resort. Barakallahu wa lakum fi Quran Azim.